calling this meeting to order at 5:30. Karen just left the room, but I don't believe we have any adjustments to the agenda. So does anybody on the select board have adjustments to the, no adjustments?
No adjustments.
Is there any public comment on items not on the agenda? There's nobody, no public in the room. Is there anybody online? Comments not on the agenda? Select board? Okay, hearing none, let's go to select board new business, capital plan FY 2024. I think that's you, Karen.
We're gonna table that, folks.
Oh,
Sorry.
tabling it, that's, okay. That's
Because
easy.
I don't have it.
That's
I
good
need to-
reason.
Good reason to table.
Right.
How about the reserve accounts and surplus funds overview?
All right, so in your packet, there's an 11 by 17 sheet of paper. And it's named Fund Balance Work Paper. And this is from the audit. Eileen, you had asked about reserve funds, fund balances, surpluses. So all that information is on the sheet.
Okay.
I did my own sheet to really understand fund balances versus reserve funds. We also have special funds, which would be like energy, climate, fundraisers, pool revitalization, energy conservation, and there's more. We have proprietary funds also, which are enterprise funds, which is sewer and water, which those fund balances stay in those budgets.
Yeah.
And if there's any unassigned surplus funds, they stay in those budgets. They can be
Wait, let's just say that slower. If there's, say it again, so I
So
understand.
water and sewer
Yeah,
are enterprise funds.
okay.
Meaning they generate their own income.
Yes, okay.
So any surplus money stays
in
within
that.
those two funds.
Got it.
Okay.
And is that statutory or just standard practice? Do you know?
I don't know for
Yeah.
sure.
I mean, it's definitely common practice, but I don't know
Right.
whether it's.
So
Where is that represented on here? Just, oh, down here in the second. I got it.
Yep.
Okay.
So
No,
you see
you're just
sewer and
moving so
water?
quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just taking me a while to catch up with you.
Now listen, I don't expect you to understand this spreadsheet tonight. And if you want to come in, I can,
I just
walk
want to be
you
able
through
to
it.
follow what you're
Right.
saying.
And then the other, we have some funds that are like the White Whitney Fund and the Edwall Fund and the Cemetery Fund, which generate money from like a money market. And those three, usually you can only spend like the interest off of those funds, okay? So there's all kinds of combinations of funds here, but your fund balances, which are the general fund, the highway fund, and the library, basically those are the operating budgets, okay? So the general fund is showing there's $208,334,000 in that fund balance, okay?
And just to make note of the fact that this is as of the completion of the audit.
30,
June 30th,
2022, correct.
This is the last audit report
This
that
is
we
the-
got?
Yeah,
This is
so
the
they
completed,
close out.
this is the completed audit.
Yes.
Yes.
And then you have your highway fund, which is a restricted fund all on its own because of, we have to maintain our roads by statute. And then the library, that is combined with, so they have a fundraising account and they also have a money market.
So can you, in the simplest of terms possible, tell us, because Peg, I laughed, but believe me,
You
year
wouldn't
after
be
year,
wrong.
it's
Yeah.
like, so they hand you this and you go, all right, you know.
Numbers.
So understanding it. These fund balances that we're looking at for ending fund balance on here, those don't represent surpluses per se.
No. So your surplus is, let me find it. It's in the middle of the sheet. All right, so just below on the left-hand side, it says ending fund balance 6/30/2022. See where it says non-spendable prepaids? $81,319. Those are bills that were paid in June, but they're actually for July
To
1st
2023.
for the 2023 fiscal year, okay? So the unassigned, 127,015 is a surplus that is sitting out here. And I talked with Samantha Ruggles with our auditing company. We can carry that over year to year, or by vote at town meeting, we can designate that
Put it-
money.
Right.
But the select board cannot decide what to do with that, only the voters can, but we can also carry it over for operating expenses.
Like
And-
emergencies.
Right, so
Okay.
if you look down at the very bottom of the spreadsheet, so for the general fund budget, it says 30 days, right? And it's like 121,000, what is that number? 248.74, right?
Okay.
So we would have to have that much money. So let's say we go to town meeting and the budget doesn't pass, right?
Just to keep the doors open.
Just to keep business going. We would need that much money, and we have right now $127,000. So,
But I'm not second guessing
right,
what you said, I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, yeah.
You said we didn't run a surplus this year.
we did not. So
So that's just money carried over,
this money's been carried over.
but it's not technically surplus.
It's unassigned. It
Okay.
is considered surplus.
So it's surplus that's built up, it's just not as a result of,
last year.
it's partly, okay, because it's partly, yes, I think you're right.
Okay.
It's partly because of the opening fund balance,
Right,
it was what it was.
yeah.
So for all practical purposes, and this may or may not be exactly right, but the difference between that 245, 214, which is the opening fund balance, and the 208, 334, is that the deficit for the year?
That negative 36,880 is our deficit.
Deficit for the year,
And it
okay.
comes out of that general fund.
Unassigned.
It doesn't come out of that unassigned surplus.
Well,
which is-
sort of it, it doesn't add more to the unassigned.
Right.
Wait,
So-
what do you
So
mean,
it does
Josh,
sort of-
doesn't add more?
Well, had we run a surplus this year,
It would have
our
added.
opening fund
Right,
balance
right.
on July 1 would have been more
Right,
than
yeah,
the
yeah,
245
okay.
that it was
Yeah.
last year.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So, how the financial director can say that it doesn't come out of that, I don't know, and I'm not sure I need to know. But if it's a deficit, it decreases the amount of money that's in the fund
Right.
on the
Right.
first day of the next year.
And I didn't understand that. I'm like, well, why doesn't it just come out of the surplus? Why does it come out of this fund?
The unassigned.
Right, right. So, because the unassigned's not assigned anywhere. So we could take that money and just put it in the general fund, you know?
The unassigned we could.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
could assign it anywhere we wanted to, right?
Yeah. Yes.
With,
But with voter
With
approval.
voter
With voter
Right.
approval.
So
And-
theoretically, we could use it to reduce the tax rate.
Offset taxes.
You can
Right.
offset taxes
Yeah.
with it, yeah.
Or we could put it in the capital reserve or,
You can put in a capital
Some other
improvement,
reserve fund.
or we can create a new general fund operating reserve fund for emergencies.
Mhm.
But having it sitting out there like that,
It's pretty convenient because you can use it for whatever you want.
right,
Yeah.
right, but, technically it's taxpayers' money.
So why don't we show, you have those two numbers under the general fund, the
Yeah.
non-spendable and the unassigned. Why don't we have those for highway and library?
Good question, I have no idea. I
Because
have to ask.
we have presumably unassigned money in both of those also, don't we, or not?
No, so the highway fund, it's, their fund balance has been reduced because we purchased the
Oh, right.
loader, 145,000. That's why it's showing such a big number. But if you look down below too, so like your capital reserves, right? Your roof repair, your sidewalk maintenance, and then your total capital reserve, right? That's all funds that are in note number 3. See that? So that's like a separate account, right?
Sorry, no, where, see that, where? Oh, no, number 3, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So those reserves are for special, you can't use it for anything but what it's specified for,
Right,
voted by the people.
yeah.
So, yeah, it was hard for me to get my head around this surplus and why the deficit came out of like the actual fund, which reduces what we have in there,
Right.
overall. But that's the fund balance,
Okay.
not necessarily the capital reserve. So,
So I think the reason I was asking that question was because we were talking about possibly trying to fund the capital reserve fund. And I was just asking about whether we could use that unassigned to seed that. But I'm hearing that we probably don't want to do that because we only have 30 days.
right,
So, and we want at least 90, right? Ideally.
yeah.
Yeah,
90
so-
would be good, but
So that answers that question.
I think in
this is-
another year, we might flatten out and it may look better.
And the numbers that are in red down here
Yeah,
are the result of conversations that we had last year with our auditor upon the completion of auditing. And their recommendation is that in an ideal world, towns have 90 days of operating
Right.
available to them.
right.
I would guess, and I might be wrong about this, but I would guess that the vast majority of towns in the state of Vermont don't have anywhere near 90 days. And 30 is not ideal, but it's better than none.
Right.
And not that it really matters that we compare ourselves to other towns, but I'm just guessing that would be the case. Would you think that would be true?
I agree with you,
Yeah.
and Sam said too, I mean, we're okay, but
Right.
if we could build it a little more, we'd
Would
be
be
better.
Be better, yeah.
So we have to be a little creative, trying to get there.
Creative,
Like,
what?
like we create another reserve account, and we start putting money away into it. And then if we end up with now the ARPA money too, okay, the select board has $150,000. If you wanted, let's just say this reserve fund gets created, you could say, hey, put all that money into that reserve fund.
And then we have it there.
Yeah,
And that reserve fund, because it's, I think what you're saying is it would be an unassigned reserve fund for all practical purposes?
yes,
So we could then
That's
choose,
interesting.
so we
Right.
could then choose to spend it. It wouldn't,
Right.
But
you
the
know.
town would have to choose to spend it.
No, the select board, once
Oh.
the reserve fund
Once
is
it's
created,
Reserve
Established.
fund.
the select board has the authority to spend
So
it.
you can do that with the ARPA money. Basically, you can just say, okay, let's take it out of ARPA and
Well,
put it in a fund that we can use for anything
We could,
without.
You
but we'd
could.
have to create, the town, the voters would have to create the fund first.
Right.
And
But-
then we could vote to put money into
Oh.
it.
So,
Okay.
but one
Right.
other question related to that, Karen. If we use ARPA money for that, does that count as spending that ARPA money if we were to put it in a reserve fund? Because we have to
you're-
spend that money by 2026, right?
So you're offsetting our deficit.
Oh, okay,
Basically.
so,
You can use
I
ARPA
see
to
what you're
offset deficit,
Even if it's just sitting in the fund.
right.
but we don't have that much, we don't have 150 in deficit.
No, you don't.
So we couldn't do that with all of that.
Not
I'm just
all,
thinking,
but
you
some
couldn't,
of
we
it.
couldn't set it aside and not spend it for 10
Forever,
years.
Right.
yeah,
We'd have to spend it after a period of time
Right.
in order to meet the ARPA.
Karen, two questions. I'm sorry, I didn't mean
there's
to.
too much
No,
money
go ahead.
just sitting out there, what to do with it, you know?
Karen, this deficit of 36,880,
Mm-hmm.
are we obligated by our auditors to offset that? In other words, we essentially would be in a negative position at year end. What's the significance of that?
Well, it's significant, I mean.
No, I mean meaning, not,
So we're not obligated, so there are certain rules that towns we can borrow to make up
Right.
that deficit. We'd have to do it in the general fund and the highway fund, because they lost money too. It's already taken out of the fund balance,
right.
so it reduced that overall number. Would I want to do that every year? No. This is the first year I've seen a deficit since I've been here,
And since I've been here,
so.
So how are we gonna handle this?
we don't need to. We are not obligated to have a balanced budget at the end of the year.
Okay,
And given that we have that unassigned fund that has come down through the years as a result of many, many years of having at least a little bit of a surplus, we still have the padding of roughly 30 days.
Right.
If we didn't have that padding and we went into deficit, we would probably be obligated to borrow just because we would have outstanding bills. But we don't have outstanding bills, so we're not obligated to borrow in order to cover anything. So as long as we have remaining fund balance in the category of unassigned, then it's not that it's not a concern, because as Karen said, if it happened year after year, I mean, we lost 36 this year, so if it happened 3 more times, we wouldn't have any unassigned
That's right.
funds. And then we're in trouble. And also, just as far as liquidity is concerned, we would want to maintain some excess in case, for example, the budget doesn't pass on town meeting day.
Right.
But as a municipality and a reasonably financially healthy municipality, we have the luxury of being able to borrow if we ever got into that problem, so we could do that. But it's expensive, especially now, 2 years ago,
that was okay.
it wouldn't have mattered that much. Now, at whatever it would cost us, 5%, I'm guessing, somewhere in that range, that would add up pretty quickly and get us further behind.
Do the voters have to approve a transfer of any of these unassigned monies to cover that deficit?
No,
We can do it ourselves?
yes.
Okay.
And we don't even have to, because it's already paid, because we
Right.
already had, think of it as having
built in.
a little bit of excess money in your checking account that, you write checks, you have $300 in your checking account and you write checks for $250, As long as you don't go over that 300, you don't get penalized for it, so it doesn't matter. It means that you only have $50 left,
Right.
but as long as you can
Right.
manage that, that's okay.
Yeah,
So it's sort of the same thing. But as Karen said, if we wanted to assign that to something different, well, for a reserve fund, I mean, we could spend it down without voter approval, but if we wanted to put it in a reserve fund, we'd need voter approval, correct?
yes, to put it into a reserve
reserve
fund,
fund would
you'd
be-
have to have an article to do that. And it would have to be voted on every year too, you know?
To put
So-
the excess of
To
unassigned
put
that
the
comes up
unassigned, yes.
into whatever funds we decided
Yeah.
to put them in, yeah.
Now, is this part of the proposed budget, or is this an accounting of what's happened in the last fiscal year?
That's exactly
Okay,
the
so
latter, yep.
so the memo that you sent on January 16, where you increased the general fund by 12 grand because of certain additional monies that you wanted to allocate to different commissions, projects, et cetera, that's not reflected.
No, no,
Unrelated.
right,
Okay,
yep. So that right there is just so you can get an idea of like
sorry. Like
all of the fund balances, reserve accounts, and
This
what
is-
the balances are.
For all practical purposes, this is a very narrow summary of the results of the audit.
Right.
It's the results of many audits over many years because it compiles all that information
Right.
together. But it's a snapshot of our reality as of July 3rd, or June 30th.
Yeah,
And this was created by the auditors?
yes.
Did they accompany this when they gave it to you by any commentary? In other words, did they have any recommendations or thoughts on these numbers?
That was part of the, remember the audit book that we got?
Yeah.
Oh,
So
right.
all those
It's all in there.
It's all-
So this is a distilled version of
Right.
that.
Okay.
Yeah,
And so the comments that applied to that would come.
Right.
So my answer to that, Charlie, would be that when we look at the 30, 60, 90-day thing, they didn't specifically comment on that this year, I don't think, but just as a general piece of advice,
right,
better to have more than
That's
less.
better to have 90 if you can.
Exactly.
right, right.
But
So,
Okay, thanks.
yeah, so my hope is that, you know, we'll recover our losses from 22, or at least break even for 23.
And is there an easy thing to attribute the bulk of that loss to? I mean, is that largely uncollected taxes or it's over expense because things were more expensive?
both,
It's a little bit of
actually.
both, right?
So, yeah, last I recall, we're $81,000 in delinquent.
For 2022,
Well,
For-
yeah,
for
yeah.
fiscal, for FY 22, 23,
No.
overall?
No, so delinquent, meaning not 22 taxes, but everything prior to,
Oh, okay.
so 81,000. And a bulk of that is, you know, for 21.
Oh,
So-
I see what you're saying,
Yeah,
yeah.
so the
So-
tax year and our fiscal year don't like
Line up.
course not.
coincide.
Yeah. Be way too soon.
It's like the
Just saying.
academic year, the
Just
fiscal
saying.
year.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah.
So, yeah, so for 21, you know, it was roughly like 70,000, I think, or 72,000. So if we would have collected that, right, and we were in a deficit of 36, we would have come out ahead, right? That's not always going to happen. We overspent in our general fund budget, and I can justify the over expenditures because I added a full-time employee. We had to have insurance, and then the fire department, you know, had some extra over budget stuff. So pretty much that's it in a nutshell, you know. So sometimes you're gonna go over budget and you hope that other line items will be under, so they'll offset one another. But if you're not collecting all of your revenue,
Right.
that doesn't help either. And for tax year 22, which is fiscal year 23,
Which is the year we're in.
which is the year we're in.
It's the year of the rabbit or something, who knows?
It's hard to predict right now. I can say there's quite a bit of outstanding taxes for second payment,
Okay.
and hoping third payment doesn't.
Most people
I'm gonna be
catch
shaking the
up for
bushes.
third payment.
I'm gonna be
but, yeah.
shaking the bushes hard. So,
When that happens, do we charge interest to the
Oh,
delinquent
yeah.
taxpayers?
Yes, I think
I would
8%.
imagine so.
Painful, well, it's more than 8%, it's
is-
one way. If you don't make your payment on the February one,
Yeah.
you get an 8% penalty overnight.
yeah,
So on whatever it's due, February 20th,
Right.
it's X amount. The
Oh.
next morning, it's X amount plus 8, plus you pay an additional 1% per
Right.
month. So an additional 12% per year.
yeah,
But that doesn't happen with the November payment.
No, you pay, well, you start paying the 1% per year,
yeah, you'll be doing.
Oh,
but you
okay.
don't get
Yeah.
slapped with the
Okay.
8%.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's very important to make your payments by February 18th, because if you have any balance,
It's expensive.
it'll be 8%.
When is that collectible? I mean, suppose you're late.
When-
So
when-
suppose you
so-
file on February 20th
You
and you
get,
get hit with a penalty,
Yeah,
when is that due?
it's due
Right away?
immediately. Yeah, so you have,
Plus interest if you don't pay them right
we
away?
have,
Exactly.
you have a year to pay your overdue tax. Well, by policy, we do at least 2, but, I mean, not by policy. By policy, it's 1.
One.
You have 1 year to pay your delinquent taxes, otherwise things can go to tax sale. So,
Right, but
so there is a hard deadline in that
Okay.
way, but, I mean,
it's a year
the
later.
sooner
Yeah,
you
the
get your
better.
payment in, the better you are off financially, because you're being taxed, you're being penalized
Right.
every day. Does the select board have any other comments or questions on this?
I have just one more question.
Okay, and then I have Mr. Fairman, and I'd like to move on, because
Okay.
I would like to try to get this wrapped up.
Why are the ARPA funds not reflected in here? Because we haven't spent them yet?
They're in
They
there.
They're
are,
here.
but only half. Is that because we received the second half after
Yes.
July 1?
Yes.
Reflects the audit.
So 760, you've got half of your ARPA fund
Okay,
here.
Yeah,
The other half we didn't receive until after July
got
1.
it.
Can I just just quickly say that it's super helpful to me when we're looking at spreadsheets like this, when you, like you did, like halfway down
right.
is where you'll find this, or
Yeah.
I'm referring to this that's on
Yeah.
the first line over to the right. It just helps me be able to track what we're doing, so
Okay.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, this is a helpful
Yeah.
sheet
Yes, it is.
overall.
Yeah. Yeah, don't be alarmed with the highway fund. I know we need to be moving on, but the 145,000 that we bought the loader is
Is
reflected in
reflected.
that 202,000, so,
Okay.
um,
And that's good, because that means we're borrowing that much less
right, right.
going forward.
Right. Okay, comments online, Mr. Fairman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, for the record, this morning and again this afternoon, I requested via email of the town manager to receive a copy of the document that you are consulting. It was emailed to me at 5:14 p.m. today. So
Can I
that's
make a
for the
comment?
record. Now,
One second.
one of you said during your discussion just now, and I quote, "We are not obligated to have a balanced budget at the end of the year." I am looking at 24 VSA section 1523, tax bills, duties of select boards as to a deficit. Quote, "When a town at the end of the fiscal year contemplated by section 1683 of this title has a deficit, unless the voters of said town have voted a special tax to make up said deficit, or unless said deficit shall have been refunded pursuant to the provisions of Chapter 53 of this title, which refers to bonding, the Select Board, when making up the next annual tax bill, shall add thereto a tax of 5% or such multiple of 5 in addition to the tax vote already authorized by law to be levied upon the grand list of such town as will provide sufficient revenue to liquidate such deficit, unquote.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just clarify that?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Or do you want to make a comment?
Well, Karen had a comment first, and then you can clarify that if you like.
Yeah, so Mr. Fairman did ask for the spreadsheet, which was not public information because this is the first time you all have seen it. And I wasn't ignoring his request, but there is also a public request policy for the town. And so it is online, the packet's online, and I specifically asked Kim to send him the packet because he requests when we have a special meeting that he get the agenda. So this spreadsheet is the first time it's been available. So,
Okay, and he did get it
and he did get it.
before the meeting,
Yes.
so we're all above board. You wanna
So
clarify?
I just want to quickly clarify, thank you for highlighting that statute, Mr. Fairman. I guess what I was trying to say, and I definitely, you're correct, because we have this unassigned fund here, we weren't technically in deficit, and therefore we don't have to undertake that addition of 5%. So if we were in deficit and didn't have funds, unassigned funds that covered that, then that would be an obligation. But since we do, we are not obligated. So I misspoke, and I thank you for that correction. But in our circumstance, it doesn't require us to make that adjustment in order to account for it.
Okay,
Madam Chair,
yes, Mr. Fairman.
may I add a couple of supplementary comments?
Go ahead.
Thank you. First one is, I believe Mr. Laughlin is correct in what he just said. It was simply because we are in a public meeting and there was a statement made earlier.
Yes.
I wanted to clarify that Vermont statute disagrees in this regard. And as it happens, I'm familiar with this matter. When I lived in another town, there was a very significant deficit which came to light eventually, and we were subject to the provisions of this law. I have to say that I believe that our town manager has contradicted herself, because she said both that I requested information that was not yet public because you had not seen it, and then she said that the information I had requested had been posted online, which means ipso facto it was public, because once it's online, anybody in the world can look at it. So, you know, there's no harm done here. It simply means that I'm going to look closely at this because I'm curious about some items, and I'll bring it up at a subsequent select board meeting. And the reason I'm doing so is because money that the town of Putney is holding is taxpayers' money that has not been spent, has been raised and appropriated, but has not been spent. And that effectively is preemptive taxation. And of course, there may be a justification for it. And for example, working off the figures just now, I can work fairly quickly. If you have a 90-day reserve for the general fund and the highway fund, that, according to the auditor's figures, would be a total of $653,450.
Right.
Now, if we had that kind of money, I would raise the question of, should we have it dispersed in a number of funds, or should we have a single reserve fund where we can withdraw money for whatever purpose, be it a deficit, or, I don't know, a loader had a fire and we had to replace it, you know, for whatever purpose. This is something I'm going to be bringing up later, but I can't do it now because I didn't have this document early enough today, which is, you know, hey, these things happen. No hard feelings. So thank you, and more now.
Okay, thank you. And we didn't have it until now either, so if any of us want to look at it at our leisure, we can certainly bring it up next week. Is there any other public comment online? Hearing none, let's move on to FY 2024 proposed budgets, reviews, discussion and approval. We've gone over these pretty thoroughly already, except for, I guess, the general fund, we haven't quite, wasn't quite ready.
So I would make the comment that I'm comfortable with the library, the highway, the sewer and water. I would not make any changes at this time.
Okay.
I've gone over the library with Emily, she's good. Brian's good with his. Water and sewer is just basically user fee driven, and you just have to cover the expenses.
And I think, Karen, I'm correct in saying you are also comfortable with the general fund, but we haven't reviewed it.
We haven't
So-
reviewed it, and I think it's just a quick discussion, if you want to do that now.
Do you want to do that now, or do you want to, it's up to the board.
Well, I would leave it up to your discretion to decide. I am happy to make a motion to put all 5 of these budgets in a motion to be approved in one vote.
Do you have general fund there?
Upon completion of discussion, or we could get rid of the 4 and then have our conversation about general fund. Or we could just quickly go through all 4 of them, whichever way, however you want to do it, or all 5. Quickly go through them, I mean in voting on them.
I gotcha. You mean one by one?
Yeah.
What's the board
I'm happy to
feel?
do all 4 of them together.
All 4 or all 5?
4 of the one that we.
4
So
together.
you want to go
Get that up done.
get those done and then talk
Okay.
briefly about the general fund? Okay,
So I'll make a motion that we approve the FY 2024 proposed budgets for the library, highway, sewer, and water fund as presented.
second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to approve the funds of the library, highway, sewer, and water as presented. Is there discussion among the board? Is there comment online? All right, hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Fairman, would you like to speak?
Yes, it doesn't matter that you've already voted. I'm not calling a point of order here. It is simply that my question is, given that we are returning to in-person town meeting this year, do you plan to vote the budget from the floor at town meeting?
That's how we've done it in the past, right?
I think we're,
I think
yeah,
we're
not.
required.
No, I don't think we are required to, but that's certainly our common practice.
That's how we've always done, I think that's how we plan to do it, yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm because, of course, in the past 2 years, we've been obliged to do it via Australian ballot. Thank you.
Yep. So all was in favor, and were there any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. General fund.
So general fund, I've gone back and forth. What I would have loved to have seen is to take $25,000 and put it into the capital improvement fund, but I just can't. We're at 7 cents. 7-cent increase on the tax rate.
Without putting the 25
Right.
into.
Yeah.
So can you just tell us what percentage increase that represents? So that's 7 cents added to already an existing 90, I think you and I talked about.
Yeah,
Is
hang
that
on a
correct?
second. I have those papers somewhere. I have them all here. There we go. All right, so the increase will be 0.0741. So last year it was 0.8967.
Okay.
it will be 0.9708.
And that's before anything that we might approve on the town warrant, separate from the budgets?
No, so the town warning won't impact our budget. There are
Well-
petitions for social agencies, but those will just be reduced
Right,
because they'll fall into
but
a,
we do have one here for raising the sum of 25,000, possibly raising the sum of 25,000 separate
yeah, I
to go
put
into the
that
general
in there,
fund capital
but
reserve.
I put it in there,
Yeah,
but at this time,
but you're not liking it?
no, I'm not
Okay.
liking it. I'm not
Right.
comfortable putting
Okay.
another 1 cent on top of,
But we could leave it as an article because it doesn't affect the general fund, the
Correct.
budget as voted, unless it's approved. So that would be up to the voters, so that's an option.
but
If
here's,
you,
here's the
Yeah,
thing.
go ahead.
If I leave it the way it's worded, authorize raising the sum of $25,000 through taxation
right,
and appropriate said amount to the general fund capital reserve for future capital needs. That would add
right.
a
Another
penny.
penny, okay.
Right, I'm just saying,
Yeah,
in the interest of transparency, we're putting it as a separate article, not
Yes.
putting it in there
I'm not.
in the
putting it
general
in,
fund
no.
to be voted on within the
Within
general
the whole
fund,
general
which I'm
fund,
not sure
right.
we could actually do anyway,
I don't
because it's a
think we can.
reserve fund.
It's,
But
yeah, okay. So, so I think my question was answered, was that what the number that you just gave is the number that's for the general fund and not anything else that we might add as separate articles
Right,
at town meeting, okay.
that is correct.
All right,
Karen, sorry, I'm just trying to do the math. You said that after we add that 7, whatever it is, it would be 9708. What was it at the end of last year?
0.8967. The other thing too is we have the 4th tax rate, and I always have to estimate that. It's usually around $13,500. So that's for like the veterans exemptions.
that's the local agreement.
Yes, and any local tax exemptions like Putney Community Center.
Anything that's voted on.
Right, which is, those 2 articles are in here too.
Okay.
So, sorry, circling back to what I asked
The
before.
percentage.
It's roughly, I don't have the exact number, but it's roughly 9% increase
Increase.
over last year.
And
For that portion of our taxes, that doesn't include education,
Right,
That's out of our control.
which is out of our control.
And do we know how that compares, just out of curiosity, to other towns in the state, other municipalities?
so I have some numbers from other towns. I'll have to put them in a spreadsheet. I think it's a good comparison, but you have to remember, it's not apples to apples.
Right.
You know, I mean, if you look at Westminster, they have a lot more services than we do. But
Yeah.
it's gonna be hard, even with the population demographics, it's gonna be hard. But we can get a chart to
Yeah.
kind of see.
I just think it's helpful to know, is this how does this fit into a trend in the state,
Well, I mean, if you just simply compare it to inflation, which
Right.
it is down a little bit right now, but has been in the mid-8s.
Yes,
It's not surprising,
Right.
Sort of going with that.
it's sort of in line with that. Is that good? No. Is it the reality of everything in our lives? Close,
Right.
unfortunately. And I think that will take time, how that plays out as a trend versus this year, we're not gonna know for a while. Because if we increase 9% this year, but only increase 3% next year, then that'll be a lot better. But if we have to increase by 9% next year, that's a losing proposition, and it may end up being the case, unfortunately.
Well, the other factor too is the grand list. If it's not growing, it doesn't help our taxes because they just increase. So the higher our grand list,
Yeah.
the lower the rate.
And that's where the CLA, that adjustment, the
Right, and that's gonna
reassessment
hurt.
will help with
Right,
us with
yeah.
that, but that'll take a while.
Yeah, the CLA is gonna bite us,
Hard,
for
a few years.
Yeah, well, a year anyway, right?
Well, it's gonna buy the town, but it's gonna bite the people.
Yeah. Right.
You know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as much as I try to keep the budget, tight, and there are, like Josh said, there's certain things that are out of my control. I can tell you, I did a summary of towns, to see where they were going with raises, right? Some were as low as, like 4%, but some were as high as 9%. So, benefits,
Yeah.
insurances are gonna hurt us, and the county tax went up $5,800.
Mm.
So,
From 58,
$100, so we're up to
Over.
like $29,000 just in county taxes. That's a big hit,
Yeah.
and we add it all up.
and then fuel costs.
Fuel costs is another, there's nothing out of the ordinary. So, I did trim the budget and then I added money back to it. So the other factor that you need to know is there's, an additional $12,000, for the planning commission.
Right.
For their request. Equity and inclusion is in the budget for 4,000. They requested 8.
Yeah.
So that might be a topic of discussion. And then there was a request for communication
Yeah.
and engagement. So there's a.
Creation of a website, essentially.
Well, no, I have money in the budget for the website, but it's for basically community engagement, for mailings
Mailings.
and,
That's right, oh, yeah.
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 newsletters and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there's 4,000 in a new line item in the budget just for that. So,
Yep.
Which
Yeah.
article reflects the 9% increase?
it doesn't.
It does, the one to authorize the general fund expenditures for operating of expenses.
Article 9.
9.
Yeah, but it doesn't state 9%.
Well, do you think,
Actually,
the-
it's 9 and 10, because it includes highway as well, right?
do you think the voters
Oh,
are
no,
going to
that's an
understand
increase,
that?
sorry, yeah.
Well,
They don't,
Some,
They don't. So isn't that a problem?
no,
Why?
we can explain it
Yeah.
during town meeting.
yeah.
Well, I think we should.
Yeah, I mean, I have seen articles in other towns written in such a way that it says this will add such and such a number of cents to the tax rate. It still doesn't necessarily it still doesn't necessarily compute with people.
It
Because you
takes
say,
a
oh,
while.
it just takes 1 cent. Well,
Right.
that's, 1 cent on
Yeah.
1,000 or, 1,000. So,
So here's the other comment I want to make about these budgets, right? So when we look at these, Charlie, right, and you read the article, right, and it's expenses of $1,668,226, that's a big number, right?
Right.
So of that, 1,304,351 shall be raised by taxes. So there's not much revenue, so there's only $363,875 of revenue coming in from a different stream,
Right.
right? But those two articles, 9 and 10, when you add up what has to be raised by taxes, it's a significant
Number,
number,
yeah.
right? Now, the other thing I want to state is in the general fund budget on your first page, the key number is that first line, property taxes, right? So if you read over to the right, the change is $107,158, right? There's your 4 cents right there.
So, and that's an important thing to remember, is that this is, that 9% increase includes both the general fund and the highway fund.
Right.
So,
Right. And the highway budget too, when you look at that, it's that very first line item, property taxes to be raised,
right.
and that's where you're gonna get your cents on your tax rate.
So Charlie, the place where a taxpayer will easily be able to see this, if they choose to, is when the town report comes, you will have comparative annual from FY
Right,
22,
right.
23 to 23, 24. So that's where you see that. But you're right, not many people.
It's not late, it doesn't register necessarily.
Well, no, it doesn't. No, right, exactly.
There's
There are
some
those
people,
who
yeah.
bring it up, but
Oh,
there's
some-
also,
okay.
no, when it registers is when they get their tax bill and they go,
Yeah.
they're charging us more and more and more, and
Ah,
that's
but you
frustrating.
voted for it. Yeah.
Well, exactly,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, when you say, is it 9% or 9 cents?
9%,
That's what I thought.
8 cents.
Yeah.
So
Right.
in the
Little
town
less than.
report to what we're gonna do this year, because I noticed last year it wasn't in there, or the year before, but we will have the variance in dollars
X and percent.
and percent.
Yeah.
So we're
Okay.
gonna add that last column, so people can see, like you said, 9%, right? You're gonna see it in the town report.
Okay.
I have a question about, since I just did all this thinking about the housing last night, what, and I know it's a big question, but just kind of in a summary, different types of housing that we add to the town impact our grand list in what way? You know, like private homes versus rentals versus, income-specific rentals versus, versus.
You're getting into Lister world.
Versus Airbnbs, just quick little summary. Is that possible to do?
Not
Sort
really,
of.
but-
So, I mean, in general, if you improve your property, you put a deck on, or you put an addition on, or you build an entire house, the
Right.
value of your property, the land and the improvements goes up,
Right.
right? So, if it's a single-family home, it's usually assessed at a cost approach. So the cost of the structure, how much square footage you have, what kind of basement you have, what kind of roof you have, all that stuff gets entered into a system and it spits out a number based on cost tables and other factors. That number should be close to what you might be able to sell your house on the market that day. That's where the CLA comes in to play. Things like rental units are a little bit different. They can be more about income, how much income you're going to get out of that property. So you have 8 apartments and you have the rent is $500 a month. I know that would be nice. And then you add all that up over a number of years, you come up with a cap rate and you come up with the assessed value of that property. So it's not the same as the single family home.
Based on the amount of income that property produces for you.
Exactly. So, and then.
Would that be the same like with an Airbnb?
Airbnbs would be probably more taxed towards as a accessory dwelling, so it would probably be more towards a single family, especially if it's just the home. We don't have a good mechanism for those.
Do we do it income-based here in Putney as well for rental, or not?
The initial appraisal, I don't think we didn't really have, we have a few apartments, right? So those apartment buildings, anything over, I can't remember, 4, I think it's 4 units, is considered commercial apartments.
see.
Those would
Yeah.
be
Done
taxed
that
as
way.
an income approach.
Yeah.
In the
And so
initial
that's
appraisal.
where the more expensive an apartment is, the more income we're gonna get as a town.
Theoretically, yes.
Okay,
And then, you know, there's other variables, affordable housing or subsidized housing, get taxed according to whatever HUD, determines the rent, basically what the income would be for subsidized housing. Usually it's a fairly fair, market value, but it's always less than fair market value. So those things are still tested. So there's a lot of different variables in all of these, in all of
yeah,
those
well,
pieces.
that's helpful, that's, just
And
even that much is helpful.
I think, you know,
I certainly understand it from my own home, but I didn't, you know.
and one of the things that, you know, you've certainly heard conversation about, and I don't think we account for it yet, is that Airbnb is essentially unregulated, so we don't really have the ability to tax that differently within our system.
Right.
Because we don't even know if somebody is Airbnb-ing what they claim as just a residence.
You're right.
So, you know, that's a point of contention, a reasonable point of contention, that if somebody is making income, should it be based on? But as Eileen said, if it's only 4 or more units that are counted as commercial, should it be done income? It's complicated.
Okay, that's super helpful, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any other items in the general fund that you distributed tonight that are significant and we should know about before we vote?
No. I've done the best I can.
Oh, I'm sure.
Which
you
is
have.
excellent.
Which is
By the
excellent.
way, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, that's a good segue into, can we put a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the general fund budget as presented.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to approve the general fund budget as presented. Is there further discussion among the board?
No.
Swift?
Kissy?
Yep.
I just wanted to discuss a little bit about the, DIC, choice to cut that to 4 from 8 and what, because we made recommendations on what you would spend that on, and then I can't see it in front of me. I didn't get a chance to get the packet in front of me on what that line item looks like. Is it designated for us to do our charges, or is it specifically for, like, I think that we did community engagement, training? That's one question. And then the other piece is there a line item specifically for trainings, for diversity, equity, inclusion trainings? Is that separate from the 4,000?
So the 4,000 was set to stay consistent with the other 2 requests. There are grants for trainings. I think we need to capitalize on those. We missed the opportunity for a $10,000 grant for training. So that's what's in the budget right now. We're gonna have to try to work with what we have and
Great.
try to get some grant money.
Great. What is the 4,000 budgeted for specifically now, as it reads?
It's just a, isn't it just
It
an
was from
increase?
your request.
It's
Okay.
a line item for equity and inclusion.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I think really, my understanding of Karen's thinking is that we should be able to raise that money from other sources in order,
Great.
particularly to do the training.
Great.
And perhaps for some of the other items that you put on.
Can I make another comment, Swift?
Sorry, I didn't hear. Can you make a comment?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry to cut in like that.
It's okay.
But, so putting $8,000 in the budget and then not spending it would look worse than having only
Yes.
4 in there. So I tried to meet you halfway. And
Yeah, we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
yeah, I know we can get more money. We just gotta keep our eyes open.
Yeah, and I guess if, just for the select board to know, the grant was on our plate, and we just don't have enough members right now that are like on it, ready, There was a subcommittee that was formed to do the grant work and they just couldn't get their schedules together to get that. So is there, I think Karen mentioned it to me just at the meeting last night, but there is a line item for hiring a grant advisor or a grant writer. Is that true or what?
That is true. There is a grant manager in the budget already for like $31,000.
30,000, great, okay,
So,
love it.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're gonna work it
Yeah.
swift.
And I sympathize with all of the volunteer committees. I know when I was on the energy committee, there were tons and tons of grants, and nobody had the experience to even write grants. So we did end up, foregoing a lot of that. But hopefully we can, especially since we're obviously strapped for cash. We don't want to strain the taxpayers too much. If we can all start looking for those grants and doing the best we can to capture that money, that would go a long way for a lot of the things that we want to do.
Thank you for your time.
Mr. Fairman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, actually, 2 points of information. The first one to the previous speaker. You all are free to move an amendment to the town of Putney municipal budget, general fund budget, which will be voted upon from the floor at our in-person town meeting. Now, in that regard, I believe I understood at a previous meeting one of our select persons to say that a budget amendment voted from the floor at town meeting is advisory. And just to be sure that everyone knows what the truth is, I have confirmed in writing with the Office of the Vermont Secretary of State that when a municipal budget is voted from the floor, an amendment, provided that it was in order and duly adopted, is in fact binding. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't have a statute in front of me, so I'm not sure that I don't feel like commenting on that myself.
I think, Mr. Fairman, and I could be completely wrong because I'm the one who brought that up. I believe that it's binding in that we have to increase the budget by that amount, but I don't believe that it's binding in what we spend it on. And I could be wrong.
Or the opposite. If somebody slashed the budget by $7,000 because they didn't like
Exactly.
Karen's salary or whatever, then they could, they could say that, but they wouldn't necessarily. That's not necessarily where it would be.
Where the select board would. And I think I'm right in saying that, but I'm not 100%.
But hard to
sure.
say because we don't have the statute in front of us right now, Mr. Fairman.
Madam Chair, I can clarify that. When I lived in another town, I dealt with a situation like this. I won't go into the details, but it turned out that the question as to whether the amendment was binding on that specific expenditure was whether the voters in their amendment stated a date certain by which the select board had to act. And if they did so, it was binding for that particular expenditure, but if they didn't, it was not. Now, once again, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm working from memory about something that happened some years ago when I was living in another town. But what I'm going to do is I will contact my correspondent in the Office of the Vermont Secretary of State and just obtain that clarification for us. So I should be able to get back to you on that at the next meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any comments or questions about the general fund among the select board? No. Are there any further comments online? Leaving enough room for people to raise their hands electronically. Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? All right, I am about to turn into a pumpkin, so I'm going to turn the chair over to Josh for the next piece.
Do we have any more? Oh,
There's
town warning
things
articles
going on,
review and discussion.
but I do
Okay.
have to
Yeah.
high
No
out.
problem.
So, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
See ya.
I guess I can see.
So I don't
I don't
have
have
things to specifically highlight on this. I mean, we already touched on the one about raising the sum of the 25,000
Yeah.
and appropriating that amount to the general fund, capital fund. we don't have to vote this tonight, do we?
You can't vote this tonight
Okay.
because petitions are due
Oh,
by
that's
tomorrow.
right, yeah,
And we're still waiting on
So,
one,
might not
and
be complete.
I'm gonna have Larry vet these.
Thanks, Eileen.
So at this point, now that our budgets are approved and adopted, I can move ahead in finalizing the annual town meeting warning, which I will have ready for the 25th for you to adopt.
The language in here in red was added at the behest of these petitioners.
So the red is, may
Change from,
change or they may come out, okay?
So it's for discussion.
can be for discussion. Also, I mean, Article 14, is that the petition as it reads?
As it reads, so
Okay.
that's a question for Larry.
Yeah,
And Larry has massaged some articles, petitioned articles, so they make sense, but it should be a question and it's not in question form. So I'm not quite sure what's gonna happen
right,
with that.
exactly.
The
Yeah.
other thing too is that in your packet, I put some frequently asked questions and answers about voter-backed petitions. So the board does not have to accept a petition to be put on the warning. There's statutory criteria for that, but I'm gonna vet it with Larry.
Personally, I think that anything that's petitioned by the town, we would be crazy not to add it as an article, just politically. We could refuse it. I think the only
Well,
time
you can, but,
exactly. The only time I can imagine doing that is if it's something that we felt was really egregious to
Right.
the bulk of the taxpayers,
that's right.
then we might refuse. But otherwise, leaving it open for discussion is definitely a more transparent way to do it.
Well, and this one's a particular for like a social agency request, so,
Right.
and we do have a policy and we do, have it in our budget, so.
No, enough. I think one thing that's helpful for me in this article, and I hadn't seen it previously to our getting it, but there is a reasonable explanation as to why it's a request from social service,
Right.
as opposed to, as I have sort of said in public meetings in the past, more of a cultural request. So that's helpful for me in how I think about it. I don't know whether it will influence the outcome or not, but
I'm sure there'll be a discussion on the floor.
I would certainly
Yeah.
think so. And typically, as everybody probably knows, whenever we have something like this, we request that somebody from the petitioning organization is present at town meetings so that they can present it and or answer questions as necessary.
In other words, you give them a heads up.
Well, whoever wants to petition something in, or who does petition something in, we ask them to be present at town meeting, because questions whenever there's a new article, questions almost inevitably come up. Sometimes people don't show up, and that's their choice, and
Right.
then people just vote on it.
Right.
But something like this, certainly it would be in their best interest to have, I assume Keith will be present, and just be able to speak to it.
So Articles 7 and 8 on the first page. So I added those, but they've never been in the warning. Now, I did do a VLCT class, and Garrett Baxter stated that for best practices, you should always have it in every year because the voters are the ones who decide when taxes will be collected and who should collect them. And I have seen this verbiage in other town warnings. Not all towns do it, But it was an interesting class, so that was something I didn't know, and I'm just,
Are the due dates statutory?
no, it's,
Town,
so here's the thing with taxes, right? So if you don't have like an article, then 30 days after you send out the tax bill, that's when the first payment is due. But we only send out one tax bill, so you kind of have to have some sort of schedule, right? So laying it out like this is, transparency for one thing. I even thought about, just to make things easier, to have like 4 payments. But after this class, it's up to the voters to decide.
when were these dates picked? Some prior year?
Forever ago.
It's good.
Long time
So
ago?
it's been that way as long as I can
Yeah.
remember.
As long
Yeah,
as I've been paying taxes.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So,
There's one thing in here that I'm interested in, and I don't think is, well, maybe I'm thinking of voting, or delivery to town hall postmarked on or before the date. That's how we've done it in the past.
yes,
So for voting, that's not the case.
that's not the
It
case.
has to be physically in
Right.
place before,
Right.
right, okay.
Yep. The other thing too was that during this class, social agencies, right? Because we already have it in our budget, what we don't want to do is create an article, because we discussed this, if we should just have an article and let voters vote on it, right? Some towns list every single appropriation
Right.
to a social agency, right? Or you can lump an amount and then list those agencies in that group. But because it's already in our budget, like the library appropriation is already in the budget, the cemetery, right, in the budget. If you put it in as an article and it's in the budget, you're like double, you're increasing it, you're doubling it is what you're doing, which you cannot do that. So the fact that it's already embedded in the budget is safe. Anybody can question, like the library budget or cemetery budget, and from the floor, they can change it if they choose to. So.
So is there any further discussion on the warning and articles for town meeting
These are gonna come back around next week, is that?
Yes.
to be voted on?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I have nothing else.
Yeah, if you have any questions, you can see me before next week, but,
Mr. Chairperson,
Yes, Mr. Fairman.
apologies, but realizing you probably weren't able to see the monitor, my hand was raised.
I can see it. I was circling the floor here first and then heading to the monitor. But go ahead.
No, I'll wait my turn, thank you.
I think we don't have any questions from the board, so that would put you next in line.
Okay, thank you. A few minutes ago, it was said, the board does not have to accept petitioned articles, unquote. Now, I can tell you that some time ago, I confirmed with the Office of the Vermont Secretary of State that, as stated, that statement is incorrect. A warning article entails a decision. If Vermont statute states that it is voters who make that decision, the petitioned article is mandatory. The select board must put it on the warning. But that's the key, is does the statute say this is voters' decision? If so, it goes on the warning. Thank you.
can I
Thank you.
just read something from VLCT? Can the voters petition for any kind of article? Yes, but a select board is not legally required to honor a voter-backed petition unless it deals with a matter over which the town voters have been given explicit authority in statute. Some of the examples of such authority include making social service appropriations, voting to repeal the business property tax, voting to authorize the select board to hire a town manager, voting to disapprove a town ordinance that has recently been adopted by the select board. So, you know, I get most of my information from the LCT, and they have a legal department, and I'm sure they do their homework.
So I think, Mr. We're all saying the same thing in different ways. It's applicable to, it's mandatory for many things,
Right.
but not for everything, depending on the nature of the article.
Yeah.
So,
Mr. Chairperson?
yes, Mr. Fairman.
Thank you. Based on the information that our town manager has stated, I agree with. But the statement that was made earlier seemed to be a blanket statement that all such petitioned articles were optional. And but she has correctly stated that there are some that are optional and some that are mandatory. Thank you.
Yes, I used the word egregious, and I guess that's incorrect because it's mandated. It's clear what, I guess it's not egregious or not, but whether it's legal or not.
Right, you were saying under what circumstances might we not?
It's not,
Yeah.
but it's clearly some of it is not up to our discretion.
Yeah.
So, but thank you for clarifying.
None of that would fall into the egregious category. I would
No,
hope.
exactly, yes. All right, any other questions or comments on the articles? I have one question, and I didn't ask you about this before. I have been thinking, and it may be too late to do this, but I have been thinking it might not be a bad idea with the ARPA money that we have set aside, for us to come up with a list of things we think some of that money anyway should be spent on. There isn't a requirement for that to be voted on, is that correct? It's at the discretion of the select board to spend ARPA funds.
Right. And
Okay.
you've already set aside $150,000.
Right.
And, you know, if applications and recommendations come through the ARPA committee, you will be able to vote on those funds as well. So,
Within the select board, but there's
The
no
select-
requirement to have that go past the voters. Okay,
No.
that's what I
No.
thought, I just
No.
wanted to be
right.
perfectly clear
No,
about that, because
the select board has the authority to spend ARPA
as they choose.
And I would strongly
appropriately, yes.
encourage, were you proposing that we have a discussion about what we think that $150,000 should be spent on?
I do think we should have that. I don't think we need to do that right now. I was thinking if we wanted to try and do that, if there was an obligation to have the town vote on it, then we would need to do that in a
Right.
pretty rapid fashion, which would be
Right.
pretty,
But
Right.
that's not
I would
the
actually
case.
strongly encourage us not to do what you're proposing.
propose,
Well,
what?
that we not have a conversation like, oh, we have this $150,000, where does the select board think we should be spending that? Because ultimately, the entire fund is up to us to spend the
Correct.
way we want to. And I think that the $150,000 was put aside for select board in the event of, in my understanding, in the event of emergency situations or things that needed to be paid in a very rapid fashion that wouldn't have the time to, that the ARPA committee had not yet worked out their process of how to do it. I think the select board should be prepared to present some ideas to the ARPA committee that they can then recommend back, you know, like put into the hopper as when we get to the point of trying to decide what we're going to recommend back to the select board. But I would, that's what I would suggest that we do, is that we make recommendations to the
To the committee. That's-
and we give them rationale for why we
Right.
think the money should be spent, the total money should be spent, and they can put that in the hopper of all the things they're considering, all the considerations they have, and make their recommendation back to us, which we can accept or not accept.
Right.
Does that make sense?
That does make sense. No, and I think that's not, I'm not saying otherwise. I think that, I think it's important for the select board to have an opinion about at least some of how the money is spent. And needless to say, since we're the ones who ultimately make the decision, ideally, or
Right.
you all will be the ones to ultimately make that decision, we will have say in that.
Right.
But I do think it's important, and actually the mechanism you're suggesting, I think, is a good one, where we might make some recommendations.
Right.
I personally, as I think you know, I have some strong opinions about some things that we should spend that money, or some of it, on.
Right.
And I think that if we wait until the ARPA committee has done all of their work and then think about that,
No,
that might not be
the way I'm
best way
envisioning
to
it
do
is
it.
that there will be a point, I'm hoping, this was my proposal to the ARPA committee, is that there be a point at which that information, we will be
Right.
looking for that information from select board and committees and
Right.
as well as any system we have for people bringing their ideas to the ARPA committee based on some criteria that we create.
Yeah.
And I would put the select board and all the other boards and commissions and committees in town and the town manager, I'd put everybody in that category to bring those. I would hope, that's what I'm hoping for, but who knows?
Yeah. Well, you're influential on that committee, so.
I'm trying.
No, I think what I was wondering about specifically is, are there, I mean, one example is that 36,000, you know, we could choose to spend $36,000 to offset that,
Right.
Deficit.
that decrease in the unassigned fund. You know, do we need to do that right now? Not necessarily. Could we go ahead and do it right now? That might not be a bad idea, but I think it should be part of the discussion. And so, but I think the mechanism you're suggesting probably makes sense. It's certainly a good transparent mechanism. Of course,
Right.
anything we talk about is, anything you talk about is open to public scrutiny.
Right.
So, you know, either way, it would be, I think that's a good idea.
One
So-
potential scenario we might want to think about, although maybe too early to do so, is that as the deadline approaches for us to spend the ARPA money, if we don't use up the 150 grand before then, were we going to be earmarking that for a special vote on where that money is going to ultimately go?
Well, that's part of what I was getting at too,
That is a question.
is does any of it
Yeah.
need to be voted on?
Well, none of it needs to be voted on by the town.
Unless we were to want to put it in a reserve fund,
Right,
in
that
which
is-
case it
yeah,
would.
Yeah.
But given that we would still have to spend it by 2026, that probably doesn't make sense for us. So, because it would be a reserve fund, but it would essentially be a 2-year reserve fund that we'd have to spend. So having it as discretionary fund available to us seems to make more sense to me.
Right.
No, I was just positing the
Right.
timing.
Yeah.
To me, the question that has yet to be, we never answered the question. We took $150,000 and put it kind of in the select board's purview, and we said for reasons that were timely and urgent and yada, yada, yada. But we didn't say, well, what happens if we don't, if the select board doesn't need to spend that money at the point where the ARPA committee is making their decision, their recommendations about the pool of money, does that 150 go back to the ARPA committee? If we haven't, as a select board, needed to use that money?
Yeah, that was where I was going to.
Right, and we don't need to answer that question
No.
right now.
Yeah, it's
No.
not really on the agenda, so
Yeah.
I would probably table this
Okay.
discussion.
Right, no, I was only bringing it up in the context of the articles. If it needed to,
Right.
Right.
if we needed an article related to
Yeah.
that, which if we were gonna put it in a designated fund or a reserve fund,
Right.
then we would. Outside, that's sort of where what I was getting at. But I also just want to put it on,
Yeah.
I just want to put it
Yeah,
out
yeah.
there that this is a conversation
To be had.
we should be having and/or you all should be having in a relatively timely fashion so that that information
Right.
can be clear.
Yeah.
Mr. Fairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Good. I have bring up, I'm looking at the, at VLCT's ARPA FAC, and there's an interesting point here, which says local governments are required to publish information regarding uses of fiscal recovery funds, ARPA payments, in their local jurisdiction. This means your reporting on use of funds will be open for public viewing, perhaps posted on Treasury's website and others, referring to the U.S. Treasury. These reporting requirements reflect the need for transparency and accountability. Treasury urges state and local governments to engage their constituents and communities in developing plans to use these payments, given the scale of funding and potential to catalyze broader economic recovery and rebuilding. The reason I mention that is because my understanding of that is that while the ARPA committee is performing valuable work, at some point there would need to be engagement of the broader Putney community to react to what they have proposed. That's all I wish to say about that.
Howard, do not worry, we've got that. That we are very aware that that is our responsibility, and that will happen. Yeah.
A personal note here, I never worry about anything. I can't explain why, but I truly don't.
That's good. That's an admirable quality. And one that would incur jealousy from many, I'm sure. All right, sorry, I didn't mean to belabor that point. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't an article issue that we needed to think about before it was too late. Do we have any other closing comments or other business? Yes.
I'd like to make a comment. So last week in our regular meeting, when we were talking about the letter of support for the grant for Katie Iman, so I sat here and my voice got a little raised, and I just want to acknowledge and let you know, Josh, that I completely understand where you're coming from, and I respect your opinion, and you're absolutely right. Having a speaker here when they're asking for select board support is important to get the entire picture, and Katie certainly painted a bigger picture. So in the future, moving forward, anyone requesting a letter of support from the board will need to be at the meeting.
And I think that's been our usual practice. I don't know.
You're
I don't know
right.
whether we've always done it, but it's been no. And I was thinking about that also, and thank you for bringing that up. And I certainly don't.
No disrespect or anything, but I just wanted to acknowledge and say that
and I think part of that, my perspective on part of that, in observing that, is that because I'm aware that you and Katie had been having conversations for a while.
Yes.
I think part of that was the fact that you felt very familiar with it, and so you felt that which makes sense. But not being familiar with it left me in a position where, I mean, all we're doing, as was pointed out, was writing a letter of support. We weren't obligating ourselves to more beyond that.
Right.
But I do, just personally for me, writing a letter of support, I need to. So I thought it was great that Katie was able to come on, because
Yes.
that was really useful.
Yeah.
But I do think that, yeah, as common practice,
It never
should
even
just-
occurred to me to call her and say, Katie, can you please,
be present.
be present for the meeting? But you are right,
That's
we
good.
have always had somebody here to represent, a request from this board, so.
Probably
I have
Yeah.
a question that may be related here. What's the status of the hybrid meeting statewide? Where is the legislature on this?
I don't know.
So-
Because if,
It expired, right, so, but we can continue to have hybrid, which more people do attend through hybrid.
right,
But, so the way it stands right now is that you have to have one physical location and you have to have at least one person in that location
I mean, one
for public.
townsperson or public, member of the public.
Well, no.
No,
it's a
a committee member,
Oh,
somebody
Yeah.
representing the town.
Right.
essentially.
right, in other words, not just us.
No, we would be us. I mean, we would be,
We would be counted as the one? I don't know.
Well, any one of us could be counted as the one. I
Right.
mean, if the only way we could have a quorum, if 4 people on our board had COVID and couldn't come in present, as long as we had one person present,
Here.
Right,
Right,
we
right.
could,
We could do it.
we could do
Yes.
We could
it.
do it.
Yes.
Well, this discussion about the woman last week who wasn't here, under current law, so to speak, would it have been inappropriate for her to have made her presentation that way rather than being here? And so we're talking
Do
about,
it, no,
I didn't think so.
no, because she was joining our meeting.
That's
Right.
right.
It would,
Right,
what
right.
would be inappropriate is if she was having a meeting and there was not a single person
Right.
representing her group, but she's not a member of a group. But
Right.
for
right, so it
example,
would be like Swift.
Swift, exactly, yeah, if Swift from now on out, because that expired, there needs Swift or somebody else from the Equity and Inclusion Committee has to have a physical presence somewhere that's accessible to the
Right,
public
right.
in order to have a meeting that's considered duly conducted under open meeting law.
Correct.
But does our board have the obligation going forward to make a decision on hybrid versus no hybrid?
You don't have to make a decision, so.
In other words, we can do what we want.
As long as we have one person
Right.
present,
Right.
as long as we
Right.
meet the criteria,
Right.
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be too technical.
Yeah. no.
No, I asked the same question because I thought maybe you'd have to do a resolution, but you don't. You just like,
Just do it.
What are other towns doing, do you know?
I know,
My sense is they're doing all sorts of things.
yeah.
Particularly some of the smaller towns where it's much harder to have a hybrid.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
We have the technology, we have good service, et cetera, so we can do that successfully and fairly easily.
Yeah.
Mr. Fairman? Oh,
I don't think,
Up and down.
yeah, okay. You're on mute, you didn't have a question.
Sorry. Anyway, I'm okay now, I guess. Mr. Chairman, I can offer a couple of clarifications on that. The first one is, interestingly, the remote open meeting law has always allowed hybrid meetings because the law has a section on remote participation where it says, and this is the important clarification here, yes, there has to be a public venue where the public may attend, but actually a select person does not have to be present. A member of the town staff has to be present, or a select person. It really doesn't matter who. So that's the, that's the
We're not
requirement there.
don't go there.
Regarding a select person Robichek's question about where does the legislation stand, At the meeting a week ago, Representative Moricky said that it had just been voted out of the Government Operations Committee as of that day. I've been following this. At this point, that's where it stands. Nothing further has happened. So it's wending its way through the system, and who knows when something will happen.
Good, thank you. And thank you for clarifying that from now on, Karen could be the only one present in town hall.
Yeah, well,
We won't do that.
I'll argue that, and if any board or committee thinks I'm doing the same, it's not happening. And I'm on record saying it.
All right, we don't have anything, no select board addenda business, I don't believe. Do we need an executive session?
No.
I don't think so.
Okay. Our next meeting date will be January 25th, 2023, so 1 week from today, same place,
Same
same
time.
Same bad time.
A regular meeting, right?
that's our regular meeting,
Yes.
yes.
Yep.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all.